She thought she could control the narrative inside and outside the courtroom, but real justice doesn't follow scripts. What will happen when her confidence clashes with someone who refuses to be silenced? Let us know in the comments section below. The bell above the door chimed as Phoebe turned the open sign around and stepped out of her yoga studio, a reusable water bottle in hand and the smell of lemongrass still clinging to her skin. Her Friday evening ritual was simple. Lock up, grab a smoothie from the shop next door, and check in on her neighbor, Mr. Hernandez. She didn't plan to stop. She didn't even see the squad car at first. What she saw was the man, tall, well-dressed, no visible fear in his stride, walking down the sidewalk with a canvas bag in one hand and his phone in the other. Normal. So normal, in fact, that it made the sudden blare of a police siren behind him feel like a slap in the mouth. "Hands where I can see them," an officer shouted. Phoebe stopped mid-step, water bottle slipping from her fingers and bouncing silently on the yoga mat at her feet. The man, who she'd later learn was named Calvin Briggs, turned slowly, brows pinched, not a trace of panic in his expression. Calm. Too calm. The kind of calm you earn from knowing you've done nothing wrong, and also the kind that comes from living long enough to know that doesn't always matter. "What's going on?" he asked, tone polite but firm. The officer, a white woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones and sunglasses still resting on her head despite the fading sun, ignored the question. She moved with purpose, hand already on her belt, the other signaling backup. "You match the description of a suspect," she said. "Please place your hands on the vehicle." Phoebe didn't realize she'd started walking toward them until she heard her own voice break the air. "He wasn't doing anything," she said. "I was watching from my studio. He was just walking." The officer turned her head slightly, but not enough to meet Phoebe's eyes. "Ma'am, please return to your place of business," she said. "This doesn't concern you." But it did, because something in the officer's voice felt off, like a script she'd practiced one too many times. Calvin didn't resist. He didn't flinch when she handcuffed him. He only looked over his shoulder at Phoebe, just for a second, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Like he already knew how this story usually went. Phoebe stood frozen, the sidewalk suddenly unfamiliar beneath her feet. Around them, life continued. Cars drove by, music thumped faintly from a nearby car stereo, and someone laughed across the street. But it was as if the world had muffled itself around this one moment, like it didn't want to interrupt the routine of another black man getting cuffed without cause. She picked up her water bottle, dusted it off, and stared at the squad car until it turned the corner and disappeared. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage. The next morning, Phoebe showed up at her studio earlier than usual. She didn't unroll her mat, didn't light her candles. She sat on the floor, laptop open, and began typing into the search bar. Calvin Briggs arrest, Atlanta, April 12th. Nothing, not a single news alert. She called her cousin Trey, a junior journalist at a local digital paper. "You ever heard of a dude named Calvin Briggs?" she asked. "No, why?" he replied. "He was arrested right in front of me yesterday," she said. "Didn't do a thing. I need to know if this officer, Langley, I think, has a history." There was silence on the other end, then a long sigh. "You serious about getting into this?" he said. "Because if you are, things are going to get messy fast." "I'm already in it," Phoebe said. "I just need you to help me prove it." She closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She remembered the way Calvin stood still, how carefully he spoke, how quickly the cuffs had clicked. The world kept moving around people like her and Calvin, quietly, easily, but not this time. She walked to the front of her studio and changed the sign on the door from open to closed for the weekend. Then she grabbed her keys, slid her bag over her shoulder, and headed downtown. Somewhere, in an evidence locker or a forgotten camera archive, there was proof. Somewhere, Officer Langley had made one wrong move too many. and Phoebe Kidman was going to find it. The municipal records office was colder than it needed to be. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Phoebe waited in line behind a man arguing about a parking ticket from 6 years ago. The walls were that pale institutional yellow, the kind that made you feel like time had stopped in the most bureaucratic way. When her turn finally came, she stepped up to the counter and forced a smile. "I'm looking for public complaints filed against Officer Rebecca Langley," she said. The woman at the desk, whose nameplate read Denise, barely blinked. "You a journalist?" "No," Phoebe replied, "just concerned." Denise's eyebrows lifted just enough to register doubt, but she tapped at her keyboard anyway. Phoebe could see the screen reflected in the woman's glasses. Rows of data locked behind access walls. "If it's internal affairs stuff, I can't give it out," Denise said. "Not without a court order." Phoebe leaned in slightly. "What about civilian complaints? Just the public ones. The ones that should be open." Denise looked her up and down, then let out a small, tired breath. "I can give you the docket numbers and filing dates. That's all. I'll take it." The printer behind the desk sputtered into life. Phoebe watched as the papers slid out slowly, one sheet, then two. Denise handed them over like they were receipts for a fast food order. "Good luck," she said. "You didn't hear this from me, but if you want details, look up a guy named Theo Jennings. Filed 2 of those himself." Phoebe nodded. "Thanks, really." Outside, the city air hit like warm static. She sat on a bench just off the courthouse lawn and pulled out her phone. A quick search. Theo Jennings, Atlanta. Rebecca Langley. Nothing clear. A few social posts from last year, some angry comments on a local forum about crooked cops, but no concrete address. No way to find him directly. She was going to need help. She texted Trey. "Need a trace on someone named Theo Jennings, connected to Langley complaints. Can you dig?" A moment later. "Already ahead of you, he owns a repair shop out in East Point. Texting you the address." Phoebe grabbed her keys and stood. The adrenaline had nowhere to go. It just spun inside her, humming like power lines. East Point was a different rhythm. Fewer coffee shops, more corner stores, more chain-like fences than yoga mats, but it was familiar. This was the part of town her uncle used to live in, where barbershops doubled as therapy rooms, and cookouts happened whether it was anyone's birthday or not. She found the shop, Jennings Auto and Glass. The bell above the garage door chimed as she stepped inside. The air smelled like oil and dust and old radios. "You don't look like you need a tire rotation," said the man behind the counter. Theo Jennings was broad-shouldered, maybe in his early 50s, with tired eyes and grease-streaked hands. There was wisdom in the way he didn't move too fast, like he'd learned the hard way that life didn't reward rushing. "I'm Phoebe Kidman," she said. "I was told you might know something about Officer Langley." Theo's smile vanished. He set down the wrench in his hand, wiped his palms on a rag, and tilted his head. "She come after you too?" Phoebe shook her head. "Not me. A man named Calvin Briggs. I watched her arrest him 2 days ago. No cause, no charges. That made sense. I think she's got a pattern." Theo scratched his beard, sighed. "She pulled me over twice in the same week last year. Claimed I had a busted tail light one time, for failure to stop the next. Took everything in me not to curse her out. I filed complaints. Never heard a word back. Do you still have the paperwork?" "Yeah, in a drawer somewhere." "What?" "Because we need more than just feelings to take her down," Phoebe said. "We need a pattern. We need stories like yours." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll get them." He walked to the back. She heard drawers open, then the shuffling of paper. When he returned, he handed her 2 yellowed envelopes. "Be careful with this," he said. "Langley doesn't just push people around. She knows how to make things disappear." Phoebe left with the envelopes clutched tight under her arm. Back in her car, she didn't drive, she just sat. Her pulse pounded. This wasn't just about Calvin anymore. It wasn't even just about Langley. It was about the silence people had been taught to keep. The silence she'd kept, too. Until now. By Sunday afternoon, she was sitting across from Calvin's mother in a small, neat living room filled with family photos and a scent that reminded her of lemon polish and slow-cooked greens. "Calvin said you were there when it happened," his mother said. Phoebe nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't know him before that, but I knew what I was seeing. He's out on bail now. But they're moving quick. Court hearings set for next Thursday." Phoebe leaned forward. "He needs a good lawyer, someone who'll fight." "I know just the one," she said. "Name's Malik Jefferson, civil rights. Used to study law with Calvin back in the day." "Will he take the case?" "I called him already. He's flying in tonight." Phoebe stood to leave but hesitated at the door. "I won't stop, Mrs. Briggs, I promise." She walked back to her car with her head high, her feet steady. The city lights were coming on, one by one, like sparks in the dark. Phoebe wasn't a cop. She wasn't a journalist. She wasn't even sure what she was doing anymore. But she knew this. Something was broken. And she wasn't afraid to pick up the first stone. By Monday, the whispers had turned into echoes. Echoes that bounced off social media walls, trickled through group chats, and spilled into the real world. People were starting to talk, not just about Calvin's arrest, but about Officer Langley, about patterns, about silence that had gone on too long. Phoebe sat cross-legged in the back of her yoga studio, laptop open, phone buzzing every 10 minutes with new messages from Trey, Theo, or someone who had seen the short video clip she'd posted on Instagram. Just 12 seconds of grainy sidewalk footage recorded from her studio's front security camera, showing Calvin being cuffed, calm, compliant, and yet still handled like he was a threat. She didn't add a caption. She didn't need to. The comments did all the talking. "This keeps happening. This is my brother's friend. Same officer, same story. And are we going to say enough?" Phoebe leaned back, fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the mat. She hadn't planned to be in this. She wasn't an activist, wasn't trying to become a symbol. But once you see something that doesn't sit right, it grows inside you, it takes root. Her phone buzzed again. The mayor's office just issued a statement investigating the matter with transparency. "You did that. You started the fire." Phoebe stared at the screen. She didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel brave. She felt like herself. Still, just trying to do what was right. That evening, she met Malik Jefferson for the first time in person. He was taller than she expected, with a smooth voice and eyes that moved like they were always 10 seconds ahead of the moment. "Phoebe Kidman," he said, shaking her hand with both of his. "I've heard your name so much over the past 48 hours. I thought you were running for office." "I don't even like public speaking," she replied. "Good," Malik said. "That means you tell the truth." They sat in a booth at a quiet cafe on the west side of town. Malik spread the complaint files from Theo out on the table, next to printouts of social media posts and the arrest record for Calvin. "She's clean on paper," Malik said. "No disciplinary actions. But this," he tapped a post from a woman named Yolanda Price, "this is the second incident this year from someone who said she searched their car without cause." "And the complaints?" "Filed, ignored, and buried," he said. "That's not surprising. What is, though, is that she's been fast-tracked twice for promotion." Phoebe's eyes narrowed. "That's not just negligence. It's protection," Malik said. "But protection can be cracked, especially if we can make enough noise." "I can do noise," Phoebe said, her voice steady now. Tuesday morning she handed out flyers outside the courthouse. They weren't flashy, just Calvin's name, a quote from Theo's complaint, and a question in bold across the top: "How many times before it matters?" Some people ignored her, some took the paper and kept walking. But some stopped. and those who stopped stayed. An older woman told Phoebe her grandson had been stopped and frisked by Langley 2 months ago. A high school teacher mentioned she'd seen her students harassed in front of the community rec center. A young man brought her coffee and said, "My cousin's watching from Chicago. He says thank you." By noon, 3 more people had emailed Malik's office offering to testify if needed. By nightfall, someone had sent anonymous dashcam footage. Phoebe sat in her car, parked in front of her studio, watching the grainy video on loop. It showed a traffic stop, Langley stepping out of her cruiser, approaching a car with tinted windows, weapon already drawn. A man's voice said, "I'm reaching for my registration." Langley replied, "Keep your hands where I can see them." Then silence. Then shouting. Phoebe closed the laptop. Her pulse raced. She didn't want to imagine how that night ended, but she knew what it meant now. It was a pattern. It always had been. The next day, Calvin finally spoke. It was a press conference held on the courthouse steps, with Malik at his side and a sea of cameras pointing like loaded guns. Phoebe stood in the back, arms crossed, heart pounding. "I want to start by saying I love this city," Calvin began. "My mother lives here. I've paid taxes here. I've mentored kids at the community center and spoken at local schools." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. No paper in his hand, just his voice. "And none of that protected me when Officer Langley decided I looked like a suspect." Phoebe murmured. Camera shutters clicked like restless fingers. "I didn't resist. I didn't argue. And still, I was treated like I was dangerous. Like my calmness made me more suspicious, not less." He looked down, then back up, voice catching. "I'm tired. We're tired. Tired of proving we're human just to be allowed to walk home." Phoebe's throat tightened. She blinked hard, then looked around. There were people crying, nodding, whispering finally. Afterward, Malik walked up beside her. "Next step is court," he said. "You ready?" "Wasn't I already in it?" Phoebe replied. That night the city felt different. Not quieter, just more aware. As if every corner now had eyes. Every silence now carried weight. And Phoebe? She wasn't just watching anymore. She was in it. All the way. Courtroom 4B was colder than it looked, not just in temperature but in energy. Sterile, distant, almost clinical in the way it stripped people down to facts and statements, removing context like peeling skin off bone. Phoebe sat in the second row, behind the defense table where Calvin and Malik sat side by side. Her hands were folded in her lap, her fingers restless. Every minute stretched like thread pulled too tight. The judge was a tall man with a heavy brow and no expression. Across the aisle, Officer Langley sat straight-backed in her uniform, not a single hair out of place. Her eyes flicked between witnesses, her jaw tense. Phoebe had watched her more than anyone else over the past week, trying to figure out how a person could move through life believing they were always right, so right that no amount of proof could make them pause. Malik rose from his seat. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth but forceful, "we would like to call Officer Langley to the stand." There was a small stir in the courtroom. Langley didn't blink. She stood, adjusted her badge like it was armor, and walked slowly to the witness chair. Phoebe watched every movement, saw how she sat tall, how she controlled her breathing. "But then," Malik began. "It started with the footage. From the dash cam. From the security cameras outside Phoebe's studio. From an anonymous cell phone sent in by someone who hadn't even given their name. Just a note that read, 'I've seen enough to know this ain't right.' One by one, the videos played. Each time, Langley said the same line. He matched the description, or, 'I had reason to believe.' But the men she stopped, they never fit the actual suspect reports. No weapon, no resistance. No pattern other than one that lived in her head, painted by fear and bias. The courtroom grew quieter as each clip played. A tension built, not explosive but steady. like an audience realizing the play they were watching wasn't fiction. Then Malik called Theo Jennings. Theo stood like he had nothing to prove. Told the story of his traffic stop twice in 1 week. Same officer, same vague excuse. "She never cited me, just searched my car, real aggressive," he said. "Told me I looked off. I told her I was a mechanic, not a threat." Then Yolanda Price. She stood shorter than she looked online, but her voice was thunder. "She made me get out of my car in front of my kid," she said. "Didn't tell me why, just made me stand on the sidewalk like I was some criminal. My kid was crying in the back seat. I didn't even run a stop sign." Langley said nothing, didn't shake her head, didn't flinch. But Phoebe noticed the way her left foot tapped the floor, a subtle rhythm, the first crack in the mask. Finally Calvin stood. No notes, no grand gestures. "I didn't get angry that day," he said, "because I was afraid that anger would justify whatever story she was already writing in her head." He looked at the jury. "And I'm not angry now. I'm exhausted." Then he sat down. The prosecution tried to argue procedure, said Langley followed protocol, said suspicion didn't need to be perfect, that officers had the right to act on instinct. But even as the lawyer spoke, Phoebe could feel it, the shift. Something in the room had changed. The jury wasn't just listening anymore, they were seeing. When the jury returned from deliberation 3 hours later, the air was razor thin. Phoebe held her breath as the foreman stood. "In the matter of misconduct and wrongful arrest, we find the defendant, Officer Rebecca Langley, guilty." There was no cheering, no outburst, just a wave of breath, like an entire room had been holding it for years and finally let go. Langley didn't react. She looked at the floor, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to object but didn't know how. The judge ordered her badge and gun to be surrendered immediately. Phoebe felt her chest rise, like she'd finally surfaced from underwater. After the verdict, the courthouse steps filled with people. Journalists, activists, curious strangers, and neighbors. Calvin stood in the middle of it all like an anchor. Malik beside him, fielding questions, smiling for cameras. Phoebe stayed near the edge of the crowd until Calvin spotted her. He pushed through the people and walked straight to her. "Guess we did it," he said, voice quiet. "No," Phoebe said, smiling. "You did it." He shook his head. "I wouldn't have without you. You didn't have to say anything that day, but you did." Phoebe looked past him at the reporters, the signs, the people hugging each other. She thought of the flyers, the emails, the long nights, the fear. "I just didn't want to be silent anymore," she said. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Calvin reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. "I got this in the mail today," he said, holding up a keychain. It was shaped like a balance scale. "No note," he added. "Just this. Guess someone out there wanted to say they saw." Phoebe smiled. The next few days moved fast. Officer Langley was suspended without pay pending full disciplinary review. The department launched a formal investigation into past complaints, and 3 other officers were named in anonymous tips sent to the local watchdog group. The news ran the story non-stop. Talk shows picked it up, but the biggest win came quietly, when Calvin's charges were fully dropped and his record expunged. On Saturday, Phoebe reopened her yoga studio. But this time, the first class wasn't about breathing or poses. It was called Holding Space. People from all over came. Theo, Yolanda, even Trey brought his camera to document it. Phoebe stood at the front of the room, palms open, voice calm. "We live in a world where silence can feel safe," she said. "But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak, even if our voice shakes." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "And when we speak together, we build something stronger than justice. We build truth." After class, she stepped outside to grab some air. Calvin was leaning on the railing, a coffee in each hand. "Still hate public speaking?" he asked. "More than ever." He handed her a cup. They watched the sun rise together. The city looked softer in the light. Not fixed, not perfect, but starting to heal. And for the first time in a long while, Phoebe Kidman felt like she was exactly where she needed to be.